Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Construction Cast. This morning, we are taking a look at the new JCT contracts. As always, it's a half-hour session. We've got 3 speakers joining me this morning. Please do join us in the chat buttons. And share your thoughts and questions for the panel, as we should hopefully have a little bit of time to take those at the end. So unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that the JCT launched their new suite of contracts last month. There's been lots of changes, and I'm sure there are lots of questions people have about what those changes mean for their projects and various things. There are lots of events taking place across the UK about what's changed and what that means for you. But this morning we're going to be looking at one particular aspect of the contract, and that is the development of gender neutral language. So I've got joining me this morning Theresa Mohammed, who is the past chair of the National Association of Women in Construction, who are part of the team that led the campaign to ask the JCT to change the language. Theresa specialises in contentious construction. She's familiar with both standard and bespoke forms of construction contracts. She is the lead lawyer on major infrastructure disputes concerning bridges, viaducts, transport infrastructure, airports, a regular speaker at things like London Build, RSCS. She contributes regularly to Building Magazine, Construction Law and Construction Manager Magazine. She is the chair of the RSCS Dispute Resolution Appointments Board, the former chair of the National Association of Women in Construction, a member of the Adjudication Society in London, and was awarded Best Woman in Construction Law at the European Women in Construction and Engineering Awards in 2017. We also have past national team member of the National Association of Women in Construction, Catherine Reeves, who is Senior Legal Counsel at Waits Group. She's previously worked at Collier Bristow and Fladgate. With a background as a solicitor in various law firms. She got her LLB from Bristol University, and like I said, she was on the committee for the National Association of Women in Construction in the UK. So Catherine, you kind of kicked off the first discussions, I think, about gender neutral language. And I think, if I'm right, it was one of the reasons you joined NAWIC in order to lead this campaign. You previously spoke to me about how you felt when you was reading the contract that addressed parties as he throughout. Do you want to talk us through how that felt for you as a solicitor and why it was you was compelled to start this campaign?
Well, so I trained at Mayor Brown and in the North, so I qualified in 2005, and I just remember reading the JCT and thinking, this is weird, like he does this, he does that. These are companies, these are not people getting out their tools and proceeding regularly and diligently. These are companies that are proceeding regularly and diligently. So why is this language so gendered? And I don't think I really thought more than that about it at that time. And then I think probably there was like a rise of awareness of DEI type, diversity and inclusion type awareness as time went on. And then I thought, well, this contract has never been developed in that way. And then you had the sort of NECs, which were overtly gender neutral, were written in a way that is meant to be more accessible, less contractual. That is obviously a whole different conversation. But so I thought, well, it wouldn't be hard to make JCT like NEC, and this is the major form that we use in this country, and this is usually the construction contract that introduces people, whether that's lawyers, surveyors, site surveyors, anyone getting involved in the commercial side of construction, and it would be really helpful to use more positive. It would be really helpful if this was changed so it was gender neutral, so that it didn't specify one gender or another, didn't have any sort of bias of male bias, that there might be men, for example, more men working in construction than women, or men understand it better than women. And this just seems to be a really, really simple change. So why can't it be done? So I think in a kind of large nutshell, that was my thinking.
Thanks, Katrin. I've just realised in my introductions I forgot to introduce Stuart. Hopefully most of you already know who Stuart is. Stuart is the founder and one of the directors here at Lionsade. And he's normally taking the hosting position if I'm not. So sorry about that, Stuart. But Stuart is here today as a guest because he also played a role in getting these changes to happen. So Katrin had the idea, and I think I'm right in saying you guys spoke about it at a party or some sort of industry event or something. But we know things like this are not simple to achieve. In fact, we caught up with Karen Kirkham, who's the chair of the JCT, a couple of weeks ago, and she was telling us about how many things people come and ask for in the new contracts, as if it's just as simple as, you know, grabbing her for a coffee and telling her I want this added in and I want that added in. So Stuart, from the initial conversation you had with Katrin, you know, to actually making a change, there's often layers of bureaucracy involved. Can you tell us how what you did when you had this conversation, how we kicked off, what happened next?
Yeah, thank you for introducing me. It hadn't gone unnoticed, but that's fine. I think we see each other so much. So yeah, it was interesting because I had a chat with Katrin and she was like, well, it's something we really ought to have a look at. And I was like, well, and luckily, and we'll come back to this, I think, later in the conversation, but I'd met Richard, the chair at the time of the JCT, a few times. And I knew he was speaking at a conference in London. So I kind of did the doorstepping thing like they do on Channel 4 when they go up to somebody's house. I went and caught him at the end of the conference after he'd done his session and said, can we have a conversation sometime about this issue? And he was like, well, I don't think there is an issue. I said, well, it's worth a conversation then, isn't it? Because some people do. So, and it was literally just that. But then the length of time, that was in, what would it be, sort of 2017, 2018, something like that. So it took a long time from then to now the official change has happened and the new contracts are out. So the bureaucracy behind it and the process is nothing like just going up to him and saying, can you pop that in your JCT contract, please? He goes, yes, all right, no problem at all. And also, as you alluded to, Karen was saying the other day, if you have a personal hobby horse that you want to add in, I'm a big fan of cycling, so maybe I might want to say, well, all construction projects should consider provision for cycling. That's not the sort of thing that the JCT are likely to be responsive to. And also that it would take, you can't just as an individual have things added to the contract. It has to be generally from some sort of organisation. So NAWIC's a good vehicle for that kind of process to be initiated. So we as an organisation, or NAWIC as an organisation, were recognised as a body that had an interest in construction and had something to say that was relevant and useful. So, but yeah, if you had a little hobby horse, and the other thing that Karen said, and I don't know if hopefully the others are not going to repeat this, but maybe they should, is that, the JCT isn't intended to be a manual for how to construct things. It's not intended to be, a step-by-step guide for everything you should do on a construction project. It's a construction contract. So little things that need adding in that you think ought to be there for, so one of people's big hobby horses at the moment is the Building Safety Act. And again, some people are going, there's not quite enough in there about the Building Safety Act. But then, is it necessary for all bases to be covered, every single aspect of the legislation? The legislation's out there, so obviously the contract needs to be amenable to the legislation, but it shouldn't necessarily incorporate it all. So those are the sort of things that have to be considered. But yeah, my initial process was just to grab hold of Richard and set up a meeting. And it was just that little bit of initial contact that led to the long bureaucracy that I'm sure Theresa and Katrin are going to explain in a minute.
And I think go on, Katrin.
Right, like on a positive note, my understanding, because I work with Victoria Peckett, who is the drafting chair. So I hope she forgives me for not remembering her precise name, but she's drafting chair of the JCT. And so my understanding is when there is a new thing that someone in an interest group wants to be added, it will then be taken away to the various colleges of the JCT, which is those stakeholders, so contractors, architects, engineers, etc., and to those colleges within those governing bodies. And no one had an issue with this, is my understanding. It's just that the new edition of the JCT, it was like all the other things basically. But my understanding is that this was agreed across the board as a good thing to be added to show like modernisation within the JCT. But the actual publishing of the new contract in 2024 took some time.
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say that we were pleasantly surprised, weren't we, Katrin, at the sort of very positive reaction we got to it. But the truth of this is, as well, is that Katrin actually drafted a really brilliant paper on this, and that's what got the ball rolling, because she wrote basically, in a very succinct way, the importance of language in contracts like this and why we needed to have this change. And it was, in effect, like pushing at an open door once people actually digested it, which was, as I say, a very pleasant surprise.
I mean, I did some research, as they say, did my own research. I did a bit of digging, and I found some academic research that showed that had, with receipts, as it were, that girls were less attracted to a career in construction from a young age than boys were, and my argument was like, this is then perpetuated by small things like not having whatever you're going to replace it with. Do you know? I haven't seen it. I imagine it's so it's the contractor, and just using the name of the parties instead of he. So that these small things kind of added up and made a difference was what my argument in that paper was. We should probably get that put up somewhere, Theresa.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what we can share the paper when we publish this out on our website. We'll put a link to the paper if we've got it somewhere, so that people can have a look and have a read of it. I'm sure it exists somewhere on the NAWIC website or somewhere like that. Theresa, so at the time you were the chair of the National Association of Women in Construction, and they obviously got behind the campaign. Can you talk us through why gender neutral language, and Katrin's touched on it slightly there, but why it's such an important part of equality in the industry?
Well, I think from our perspective, as you know, NAWIC has been determined to improve diversity and inclusion in the sector as a sort of general objective always. And I think if you're trying to do that, it's really important to look at things like this, because actually the impact is significant. So it's not just about the words you use, it's also about imagery. So that obviously links to the Image of Women in Construction project that started, I think, probably around the same time.
Yeah.
But across the board, it's about how do you describe, represent, illustrate things, because all of that has an impact. And if we're truly committed to an inclusive and diverse workforce, you have to look at things like this. And I mean, Katrin hinted at the start with, but even going back to law school days, this was an endemic problem, because even back then, when we were taught to draft, it was always he, it was always in the masculine, always, always, always. If you think about how we would write letters, always dear sirs, there was a sort of constant theme being reinforced over and over. And I think, this was a really significant change. The fact that it was received so positively is brilliant. And I think, to be honest, it was so important. That kind of reception almost took us by surprise, because we thought it'd be quite challenging. But actually, we, helpfully or happily in this circumstance, we were wrong.
It's almost like they hadn't thought about it until we raised it, and then they went, "Oh, yeah,
I don't think it really had been thought about.
Most people's minds. And again, that's an issue with diversity in the industry. When you have one group, homogenous group that are running everything and writing the contracts and managing the contracts, they don't think outside their worldview to kind of think about how other things might be perceived, and it across the board it means we get less improvement overall. Stuart, so now it came on board and we had the backing of industry groups and access to the individuals. One of the interesting points about this that we were discussing was how having a wide network can help you achieve these kind of things, whether it's diversity or things like the building safety, or like you say, site cleaning. Can you give any advice to anyone who has an idea for a similar campaign on how to harness their networks and how to get the word out there into the world?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's very much like there's a guy called Nick Child, who some people might have heard of, who once said to me, it's not, and it's very much, I said to him, we'd got an article in a magazine, and I said, and he's like, oh, brilliant, well done. I was like, yeah, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. He said, if it was what you know, not who you know, I would never be where I am today. And that's very true. Like the importance of knowing people and having a network. And so, you know, I was very lucky to have worked with a guy called David Rintle, who's now at Hill Dickinson. He was at Clark's Legal at the time. He knew Richard Saxon, the chair of the JCT, through his network, and he'd introduced me to Richard previously. So that's why when I came up to Richard at the London build, it wasn't just a random stranger who was coming. It was somebody who he'd already met at a previous event through David. And David's brilliant. Again, he's another example of a person who's really good at keeping in touch with people, building his network up, and understanding the importance of networking. And networking is not a complicated science. It's just making friends with people, finding people you like and talking to them. And yet, without that network, this wouldn't have happened. And it's, you know, making sure you're visible, making sure you're out there, making sure you're on mailing lists. That was one thing that, again, when we were talking to Karen at the JCT a few days ago, she said, make sure you're on our mailing list so you can come to the seminars, you can come to the events, you can meet the people involved. Which you know, it's just one of the core things that we always, and you know, you and I, Annie, always bang on about to clients is like, make sure you're out there meeting people. Otherwise, you'll never win work, you'll never get ahead, and you'll never beat the other competition that's out there doing it when you're not doing it. So yeah, so it was really important to make sure that we had that network, which enabled us to set up the meeting, as you say. And it was just literally, Richard's like, no, I didn't think there was a problem, and it did come as a surprise to him, definitely. And it was, yeah, and it was interesting. And it yeah, he was very receptive, and as you say, it went through fine, and it was, as Catherine put the paper together and all the work that went into it, but ultimately it was accepted, which was great.
Brilliant. And Catherine, there's still some people in the industry who don't think these issues are reported. I mean, on the whole, the reception has been mostly positive. But even the other night, we was at the JCT reception in Parliament, and they was announced, and Karen was giving a talk about all the changes that come out. And when she got to gender neutral, some guy at the back scoffed and went, "Oh, what do we need that for?" And so there are still some people that think these barriers don't exist. We shouldn't be fighting to change them. Do you think we'll ever be able to change those people's minds? Is it just a matter of waiting for them to age out of the industry? What do we think is the solution to this?
I mean, I'm glad I wasn't there at that reception. I mean, to be honest, you know, if you're going to think that, you're going to think that. You're entitled to that view, but that tide is changing, and you'll find yourself kind of being left on the shore and being the starfish, as it were. You know, I think the tide's changed. These things are seen as more important, certainly. So I am an in-house lawyer at Waits. I know Waits consider it incredibly important. That view of just scoffing and like sweeping it aside, certainly at Waits, wouldn't be welcomed. So from my own experience of in-house, and I can't really speak to a wider experience now, other than actually other big companies that I work with, or people that colleagues that I know that work in-house, or I'm very good friends with someone who works in DEI, a very large contractor. You know, the tide is changing. These things are seen as important by major players. So I don't think that it's really an option to say, why does that matter, that sort of ship, the tide has changed, the ship sailed. I've mixed my metaphors, but that's the I think that's my view. I don't really listen to it anymore. It's just noise.
And what about, Theresa, those who say that the language is a minor point? I mean, we've kind of had the discussion a little bit that, oh, it's just...
Can I add, if you think language is a minor point, probably law is not the career for you. Query whether construction, surveying, or whatever. If you think language is a major point, you're dabbling in construction law, you are swimming in the wrong seas.
Absolutely. But when it comes to diversity,
should we answer that question? I chipped in.
No, that's fine. But when it comes to diversity, you know, is it a minor point? Should we be focusing our energies at NAWIC on the bigger issues? I mean, we do, but there might be an argument that we're wasting time on the small issues when there are so many bigger issues we should be focusing on. But what impact will these small changes make to the industry? Are they big enough on their own?
Well, I mean, I think they're not small changes, actually, because if you think about when the NEC contract was launched and the fuss everyone made about the gender neutrality they had, I mean, I think actually it is a big thing. It's not small. But I do take the point that when you are part of a focus group or part of an organization like NAWIC, you do think, well, how can we focus our efforts? Because you can't do everything all the time. And so that's why I think it was really good to have Limeslade galvanizing this with us, because you can easily move from a different problem from one to the next, and not you can't solve everything all the time. That is one of the challenges. But I would say, okay, it's not enough, but it is important. And I think that we've often discussed that the problem that we have in construction is that we just don't deal with this early enough. So we need to be thinking about the school stage, early on in education, way before we get to the point where someone's trying to fill in a JCT contract. But having said that, that's a really important change to have, probably the most popular form of contract, construction suite, one of the most famous in the world, taking this on board as important enough to be part of the suite of major changes is significant. But, like I say, there's always 101 things to do, and we probably should be doing. But this is a big step.
I think it's like, with the benefit of hindsight, this was just something that we thought of, and it kind of took off and made some headway. I'm sure there were other campaigns where they didn't. It's just that this one did, so people could then in retrospect say, well, why did you focus all your energy or the time on this? Well, we didn't really. It's just that this was the one that people seem to start being interested in, and actually did make a sort of a difference. So yeah, I will always be very proud of it.
Yeah, and to be fair, you guys were part of the subcommittee that were leading the charge on this. We do have committees that are making really big headway in the PPE campaign at the moment, which is another massive campaign that NAWIC is running, to kind of to increase the availability of PPE, and as well, like Theresa mentioned, the image of women in construction, which is a huge project which is currently touring around the UK. So do keep your eyes on the NAWIC website, because I think actually, Theresa, you might be hosting it at some point this year. We're hosting that at various different places throughout the year to showcase the diversity across the industry, and not just diversity in terms of people, but also in the types of careers you can have, which again is another thing that's important when we're going into schools and saying, construction is not just builders on a site, it's all these different skills and experience you can have. We do have a little bit of time left. We've gone quite fast this morning. I don't know if any of the panelists want to expand on anything we've covered, or if anyone in the audience does have a question, please do share. Is there anything we've covered? We've all talked too fast.
I don't think that there's anything I think there is a danger of like banging on about one simple change so much that the officers in the room sort of look like they have a point. So I think that there isn't that much to say about it, other than it was so glaringly obviously necessary. It was so simple to do. Once the point was made, and and some reasoning behind it was given, it was pushing it an open door with JCT, and the reason any length of time that they took was really to do with the other changes that were being discussed. This one, as I understand it, as soon as it was taken to all the colleges, it was agreed, which I think shows a real change in the industry, certainly from the one that I started working in. I think there would have been more people scoffing, and that would have played out better, had more airtime 20 years ago. 20 years.
I guess the only question for me, and because I'm not a lawyer, is are there any kind of risks or complications as to changing he from they? Because as someone who writes a lot and uses language, they is, why wouldn't you use they other than he? But were there any risks that you had to manage from a legal perspective?
I mean, Theresa, do you have a new copy of JCT to hand? I put you on the spot. I don't. Did they change it to? I think they changed it to the name of the entity person who was, entity or person who is doing
Yeah.
thing. So it's always going to be contract administrator, it's always going to be contractor, not always going to be employer. So, I mean, there was never any risk, to be honest, of misunderstanding those terms in that contract or thinking one was the other. But if anything, it could be clearer now, because, you know, if you're saying the contractor, the contractor, to me, that wasn't a change that was so onerous to make or difficult to read the contractor over again, especially after NEC led the way in that. That I know it doesn't make any difference.
There we go. Karen's just added in. Let's see that.
The contractor is it, the adjudicator is they. So there we go. Thank you, Karen, and glad we've got you online for this session. So I think, unless there's anything else from the audience, we might wrap up on this one. Next month we are going to be looking at, it's marketing, isn't it, Stuart?
Yeah, so we're going to have a quick look at the importance of authenticity in marketing and how you grow your business. So yeah, good to see as many people there. We're going to have to work out the date, because one of the speakers phoned me up yesterday to say she couldn't do the date that we planned, but hopefully it'll be at some point in July. And then we'll take a break for the summer and be back in September.
And as we mentioned, there's lots of events. I know Karen is speaking at lots of things over the next few months about the other changes and the practical changes that are going to happen for your contracts and your projects and things. As always, if you've not found it before, the LimeSafe website does have an event calendar which lists all the upcoming good construction and legal events that are taking place across the country. And as Karen said, not just her, there's a whole bunch of people who are going to be talking on it. So thank you, Karen, for clarifying that. So yeah, we'll make sure those are listed. As always, this will be up on the YouTube and on the website. If you want more information about NAWIC and you want to get involved with any of the campaigns, or just join us as a member, because it's a great organisation to be part of. We host regular events and can help you broaden your network of fantastic professionals across the industry. You can visit nawic.co.uk to find out more about that. Events at NAWIC are open to men and women, so you can come and join us even if you're not a woman and find out what was going on. And it's just we host some wonderful events, lots of site visits coming up across the summer, walking tours and general social events and things like that, as well as the CPD style stuff. Other than that, a big thank you to Katrin and Theresa for joining us. It's been great to catch up with you this morning.
No, it's a pleasure. I didn't realise that Karen was on. I mean, I really JCT was so gracious to us, and they were so, you know, they met us straight away. So yeah, that I'd just like to say a big thank you to Karen and the JCT drafting committee. We really did have a nice experience with this, wasn't? Yeah.
I just had a look through the list of, there's some quite important people on the list of attendees. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Yes.